Welcome to Changed, the podcast that's all about the stories that shape us, the moments that move us, and the growth that keeps us evolving. I'm your host, Megan Galloway, and each week we'll dive into powerful stories of transformation. Because the truth is, change is constant, and it's what we do with it that defines who we are. So whether it's a major life shift or the subtle everyday changes that lead us to something bigger, this podcast is here to inspire, challenge, and celebrate the journey of becoming. I am your host, Megan Galloway, and I'm so excited to be here today with Kyle Hagge. Kyle works at Morning Brew. He is the chief of staff at Morning Brew, which has incredible offerings, including an amazing set of newsletters that you should definitely check out. He lives in New York City. He recently got married, which is amazing.
Yes, I did.
Yes, congratulations. And before that, he was in a lot of community building and higher ed as well. He hosts his own podcast called Per My Last Email. Is that what it's called?
Yes, per my last email.
Per My Last Email. So you should check that out as well. And a very little known fact is that Kyle actually holds one of the records on a Delta plane for a Tetris score of some sort. I feel like that's quite an accomplishment, Kyle.
Yeah, I mean, kudos to the research team over here. That's incredible. My wife was probably amazed that I played for like 6 straight hours, but I had to get number one, so I was locked in on this plane big time.
Oh my goodness. Where were you traveling to or from?
We were traveling back from London. Honestly, the plane ride went so fast because of that, though. Like, I was still ready to play, and they were like, "You're actually in New York now. Please get off the plane, sir." And I was like, "All right, perfect. Here we go."
That is incredible. Oh my gosh. Well, I am so excited to dig into this with you. We've met cross paths quite a few times now in
Yeah.
a variety of capacities. And I'm always so impressed with the ways in which you drive your life with intentionality and ambition and kindness. And so I'm excited to chat a little bit more with you about some of the stories from your life in particular. So my first
Love it.
question for you, what has been a defining moment in your life that has changed who you are as a person?
Yeah, let's start with a nice, easy warm-up question. I love it. I think there's a few. The biggest one is probably one that is maybe starts sadder, but ends, I think, pretty optimistic. When I went to my freshman year of college, I went to George Washington University. I was originally from Minnesota and was studying political science and thought, well, there's no better place to go than Washington, D.C. And so I went there and I proceeded to have the worst 10 months of my life. Like, had very little friends, maybe one or two, really tough meeting new friends. I was pretty like social in high school. And I think getting out of that and not being home and having to like figure out how to make friends again, I really struggled with. I was not doing well at school at all. My mental health was like deteriorating rapidly. And so probably for the last like 3 or 4 months, I was in a really bad spot. Like, days were terrible. And quite honestly, I'm normally a very happy person. So this was like also new to me. So I didn't have the tools or the tactics or any strategies to like figure out what was going on and then how to get through that. And so I remember coming back home for the summer, feeling one, like I had disappointed my parents by not doing well at school, disappointed myself, felt so unlike myself. You know, you get in the spiral where you're convinced like you're going to feel like this every day for the rest of your life. And it's just not a good spot to be. And I remember it was like I had to go back to school in like, I don't know, a month. It was well past the time where you're supposed to tell someone like I'm transferring. And I remember just breaking down and telling my mom, like, I can't go back. Like, I can't do it. And I ended up transferring to University of Minnesota. And I remember like going through that moment and being like, I would do anything to not have to go through this, be there right now. And now looking back on it, you know, the power of hindsight and growth, like I genuinely, and I know this is like a cliche or maybe a trite thing to say, but I genuinely do mean it. I would repeat that year again, 100%, knowing where it led to now. I think it gave me so much more perspective on like not understanding how hard sometimes life can be mentally for individuals. Like, I never gone through it, so I didn't know what it was like. That gave me like a ton of empathy and really like that saying, like, you don't know what other people are going through, and like be kind. It made me so much more empathetic. It also, I was forced to learn how to figure that out. And part of that was I went on medication, like anti-anxiety medication for like 6 months. I really wanted to get off of that, but I thought it would be a nice like stopgap. That was an interesting kind of relationship of figuring out that side of the world, and then got off that. I had to get like much healthier and like work out and like figure out what actually kind of contributes to getting you back in a really good spot. And those are now tools that I use all the time. And every time I'm like not feeling well, I'm like, this is like so easy compared to what I went through my freshman year that like I'm not even worried about it. And just having that confidence that I will get through it helped me tremendously. So that was a hugely defining moment in my life that sucked at the time. And now I'm super grateful for it.
First of all, thank you for sharing. Uh,
Yeah.
Second, it sounds like you got really great tools out of that experience that you continue to employ even now.
Yeah.
How would you say that that experience changed who you are as a human being?
Yeah, I think, the first thing is definitely much more grace to myself and to other people. I mean, I literally I think about this moment a lot, like, if, I'm really mad at someone or, like, someone's doing something I just don't quite understand, or I'm like, what is their problem?" Yeah, it gives me this, like, a check where I'm like, "You really have no idea who this person is, what they're going through, what might be going on in their life." And you had an experience that you probably weren't showing up in your best way, like they might be going through that as well. So it definitely just gave me more empathy and a much more like humanistic outlook on life. That was a big thing. It definitely made me like more, I think, proactive or intentional about mental health. And it's not something I honestly like I have to worry about too much anymore, thankfully. But some of that might just be like I've learned how to kind of navigate some of these flare ups that come just as being human every so often. But it gave me more confidence that you could get through everything. And then my first tattoo is like Invincible Summer in French, and there's a great quote from Camus, Albert Camus, it says, "In the depths of winter, I found within myself an invincible summer." And I think you get this deep confidence, and it's also a really calming to be like, I went to like rock bottom, my own rock bottom, and bounced back. So like there's nothing else that is gonna kind of knock me off my path. I already touched bottom. I touched the bottom of the pool and I came back up. Like I know I can go that low and get back up again if it ever happened. And I think that actually prevents you from going lower because you've had the reps now. The worst part of that experience was I'd never been there before and I was like, oh shit, I don't know what's gonna happen. So yeah, it taught me a lot, and honestly super grateful for the experience now looking back on it.
That is such a good quote because I do think that there's a lot of validity in the idea that when you've gone through some of those really hard things, like something that you just said that resonated with me is like, those moments when you are human. It's funny because we're deeply flawed humans all of the
Hmm.
time.
Yep.
And life is filled with so many ups and downs that are completely uncontrollable in a lot of instances. Some of the downs that are part of life are inevitable, like losing people and grief and some of these really hard things that
Hmm.
happen in our lives. And having these types of tools and knowing that you can get through even the hardest things and that that even if you go through one of those dips, that there is a way to the other side. Like
Yeah.
that is something that is a tool that I wish all people had in their
Hmm.
pockets because I think a lot of people feel alone going through hard times like that.
Yeah, 100%. And maybe this is a different benefit and it feels a little selfish, maybe even to say out loud, but like I do think it's made me much more relatable and has allowed me to have like deeper conversations with people. I think no one's interested in the person that has had no adversity in their life and just can't relate to struggle. And I've been very privileged in my life. This is just one dimension that I had adversity on. But I think you tell someone that story, I've had so many great conversations after where people have opened up to me about a struggle that they went through. And I think we're all looking for permission, maybe to share some of these harder moments in our life, but there's not an obvious path to just like, or an obvious like moment to share them unless someone kind of steps up and is a little vulnerable with you and gives you the space to be vulnerable back. And I think that's been, also a real blessing. It's made me more relatable. It's allowed me to have better conversations with people. It's allowed me to learn things about friends or strangers that I would have not known if I didn't go through something like that. So that's been definitely another benefit as well.
Mm. So let's dive into the people in our lives a little bit more then.
Yeah.
You have a person in your life that you feel like has changed you deeply as a human being.
Person in my life that's changed me deeply. I would say there's many, and I was just talking to some Morning Brew people and talking about how cool it is to be like a manager or a mentor because we've all could think about people that really impacted our lives. And so, if I'm not going to list your name and you're listening and you think you should be on this list, no offense, you're in my head. I think one of the ones that comes to mind is my former boss, Chuck Swoboda. He was the former public company CEO of this company called Cree. He was CEO for 16 years. He retired. They were doing about 1.6 billion in revenue when he retired. He became Marquette's innovator in residence, Marquette University. And then I actually got connected to him. He had cold emailed me because I was doing this podcast and he wanted to start a podcast. Got a coffee with him and then he basically hired me and I was working at Marquette under him, producing his podcast. He was writing a book. He was doing a bunch of speaking. And, the impact for there was basically like I got like a mini MBA. It felt like for 2 years, I got to work super closely with someone who, had done like 64 quarterly earnings calls as a public company CEO and had seen crazy innovation. They were super early in the LED lighting space. He had a ton of really interesting ideas about people and not process and innovation and how to think about expertise versus being a beginner and all of these really wonderful insights that were carved after many, many years in business. And I just felt like my learning grew so much. And also, like, he had this really powerful way of giving you feedback. But while he was telling you something he thought could be better, he was also like inspiring you that you could do it. And that's a really hard thing to do. Like, oftentimes you give someone feedback, they're like, oh man, I messed up and I can't do it. It was this cool way of like somehow pointing out what I was doing wrong, but also being like so confident that I would do it right. And so when you can nail that, then I was like, "Oh, just like give me more feedback because this is great. I'm learning what I'm doing wrong, but I'm motivated to keep getting better." So I grew a ton from him, and I know 100% my next job was Morning Brew. There's no way in hell I would have ever gotten the job at Morning Brew if I didn't come across Chuck. So really great mentor, really great person, really great business leader, and I was super fortunate to have met him.
It sounds like it. It is amazing, I think, when we have those types of people in our lives that come, like, into our lives, I think, at the right exact moment that we need whatever interaction that is, and they create that pivot point that puts us on a different path that we would have never expected or maybe was part of what we were dreaming of, but we had no idea how we were gonna get there, and, yeah, tremendously grateful for those types of people, and it sounds like Chuck
Yeah,
is one of those people.
100%. And what I think is cool now, we actually talked about this on Per My Last Email. This like idea of like mentorship is there's like, you can have a formal mentor or someone that really impacts your life that knows you, like Chalk and me were, friends and colleagues. There's also just so many people putting out really great content, writing a book, having a podcast, doing a TED talk that are really wildly inspiring and I think can change your life in some ways. So many people will read a book and be like, my whole worldview is changed because of this book. That book is Range for Me by David Epstein. I have gotten to know David very, very lightly, but like when I read the book, I didn't know him. It is cool that you can find people that have, this way of thinking that they've distilled so clearly and communicated it so well through a medium that it can impact you without you ever meeting them. And there's something very cool about that and also very inspiring for people like yourself who have a show. You're never going to know every single person that listens to this. And in some ways you'll never know that like that one, that two, that 10, that 100 people that did were deeply affected by it in some way. And, to me that's just like a great way to wake up and be like, I might not know how much the work I do benefits someone, but like trusting the process that it is, it's a fun way to live.
Mm. It reminds me of I don't know if you've seen, like, social media. There's a trend around this idea of, like, glimmers. They're, like, these little happy moments that you should latch on
Mm.
to. It's kind of like that, but in my mind of, like, you leave behind these little, like, glimmers of inspiration and hope and change for the people in your life, whether you're intending to do that or whether it's accidental. Like, all of us
Yep.
impact other people, whether we want to or not. our
Yeah.
actions and our choices and our relationships do leave behind impact.
There's a great, I think it's RFK, not RFK Jr., the old Robert F. Kennedy. He has like a ripple of hope speech. I think it was RFK or JFK where it's like you throw a rock in a lake and there's, this ripple effect. And when I was in AmeriCorps, that was like one of the quotes they talked about all the time. Like, you might not know where your ripples go, but you creating ripples is like that's all you need to know. They are going somewhere and they're benefiting people positively. And I think that's a great like life philosophy.
So, speaking of philosophies, what is your perspective on or approach or your personal philosophy around change in your life? Do you love it? Do you hate it? Do you want more of it? Like, do you want
Mm.
less of it? How do you view change in your life?
Yeah, I mean, I think, and Chuck talked a lot about this, and it's a really interesting topic. I think we're hardwired to not want to change, like human beings. Like we like our defaults, and so I think if you think you like change, I feel like you're like lying, or you've created a default in which like you've created a path where you can get change in a way that's helpful. But I think if you do want to change, it's really powerful to know what you're up against, which is like every fiber in your body kind of doesn't want it to happen. At least that's my understanding of it. And so I think that's like a good place to start. However, I think you need to change over the course of your life, obviously, to keep growing, to keep evolving, to find new opportunities. And so if you want what's on the positive side of change, you have to find some sort of strategy on how you can bring in change to your life when it really you don't want to change. So I think there's a few things that you can do. There's a great book called Make Time by John Zaratsky and Jake Knapp that's all about setting defaults in your life. And I think if you can create defaults that lead you to more change, like that's kind of how you hijack this process. Obviously, Atomic Habits by James Clear, where his big thing is like first you standardize, then you optimize. So instead of trying to go for one giant big change, I'm going to go to the gym, and lift 1,000,000 pounds the first day. He's like, just go to the gym every day. You don't even have to lift. Like, walk to the gym, check in, leave. Standardize the process and then optimize it. And then there's other really interesting study. There's also a great book called How to Change by Katie Milkman that I really recommend, and she's a brilliant professor at UPenn. They did a study of the London Tube, and at one point there was construction, and so the normal route for the London Tube got disrupted. And so people that used that route to get to work had to find a new route. And so it was forced change, right? Like they could not use their default to get to work. And then the train eventually came back online and people could go back to the way they were traveling to work. And what they found is many people actually found a better route, a more effective route that they would not have found unless you actually took away this option from them and they stuck with the new way. So I think a great way to think about change is how do you also introduce constraints? I think people think constraints are like the opposite of change or constraints actually reduce, what you're going to be able to do. But constraints actually force you to change and force you to go about things differently. So if I were like, man, I'm not feeling like I'm exploring enough new things. I want some change in my life, but I'm not sure how to do it. The first place I would think is like, what constraints can I put on myself that force me to change? It could be as simple as going to work. Like I'm in New York. My constraint is I'm not going to ride the one train anymore. I'm going to have to find a new way to get to work. And then you're going to come across a new museum and you might run into a new person and you might find this new route is better. Boom. It's like forced change. And you could do that in kind of all elements of your life. So that was a lot of rambling, but that's kind of what initially comes to mind when I think about change.
I agree with you that it's inevitable, and there's really not a lot that you can do to prevent it from happening. And most of us don't like it. So, if you can find
Yeah.
ways to hijack the process, I do think that it can make it so that we feel more comfortable through the discomfort of change, which is inevitable because I think that a lot of us are rooted, especially in today's society. We get so rooted in today's society in who we are and our identity. And I think that in a lot of ways, that's a positive thing because people are really passionate about the causes in which they care about. And then on
Yeah.
the flip side, it can make it so that it makes it really challenging to change, even when change is the right thing to do.
Yeah. It's such a good point, and I love that you brought up identity. Paul Graham has a great essay called Keep Your Identity Small. And basically, like the more things you pack into your identity, the harder it is to change because people don't want to abandon parts of their identity. So the more tight you can make your identity, the more opportunity you do have to change. And I think that like identity piece and that belonging piece is really interesting too. I think, I instantly go to politics, and I think when we go to try to convince someone of like our preferred policy position, we want them to change. We start explaining to them like how we came to this idea and like, oh, if you just could understand the logic I took to get to this policy position, then you'll obviously adapt it. And I think we try to convince people using what convinced us instead of thinking about what would convince them. And there's like this great quote, like, you want to convince someone, don't show them how they're wrong, show them how they're right. And being like, what matters to this person? And how do I tie what matters to them to this thing over here that I want them to do? Because then their identity, their belonging, their community, it actually makes sense for them to change. So I think, yeah, talking about change with other people is also a really difficult situation because we're so biased to our own perception of the world, and really understanding what motivates someone else, their identity, what their belonging is, goes a long way to helping others change too.
I agree completely with that. So, on that note, is there anything that you wish never changes about who you are as a person?
Oh, this is a great question. I think I'm like a deeply optimistic person. And I hope that never changes. I think it's can be cool to be like pessimistic and cynical. And particularly now, I like social media, I think thrives on like telling people that that's stupid or it will never work, or like it's like a bunch of people dunking on each other. And it feels very like cynical to me. And, I think even big things like climate change, like, of course, I think that's a huge deal. And like, I want to see the planet continue and I want to see humanity continue to thrive. But there's a way to approach it that's like so pessimistic that I feel like is like depressing, where it's like, we're screwed. There's nothing we can do. And I think being pessimistic removes people's agency. And I think being optimistic is like the most pro human, pro agency thing you can be. Like, yeah, we might be screwed, but like there is still something in our locus of control that we can do to make the situation better. To me, that's so empowering. And I know like I always come back to that when I'm facing anything difficult. I'm like, okay, that's fine. I think there's a way we can make this work deeply. I just have an innate optimism, and I think those are ultimately the people that make any change happen. You almost have to be optimistic to make change, because if you were pessimistic, you just think it couldn't get done.
Yeah, you need that like sliver of hope that can be that like shining beacon that pulls you through
Yeah,
whatever it
exactly.
is. I love that. Well, Kyle, we went deep, fast, and honest, which is amazing.
The
Thank
first
you.
question, I'm sorry, maybe we went too deep.
No, there is no such thing in my opinion. I think of hearing about other people's experiences with these types of I don't think that this is something that most folks normally talk about on a regular basis.
Yeah.
Because I think that a lot of times we hold a lot of like shame or worry or fear of judgment around changing as human beings because
Mm,
we're not always sure how we feel ourselves about change. So I think that opening up the conversation is a great thing.
yeah.
So last bit is I have some speed round questions for you. Are you ready?
Oh, love speed rounds. Let's do it.
All right. What's one thing that you used to hate but now you love?
Maybe salads.
Salad. I like that. All right. What is one book or movie that's changed your perspective?
Range by David Epstein.
That's good. Yeah, you had so
Book.
many good book recs in this episode. I love it. If you could instantly master any skill or habit, what would it be?
I think I'm pretty good at this, but if I could master it, storytelling. I think that never goes out of style. I think, the most human skill. And I think in a world of automation, AI, all of that, storytelling will be the one last remaining thing that feels very, very human.
Hmm. Good answer. What is one thing you wish you could change about our world right now?
This is going to be like a nerdy answer. I love America. I'm like very proud to be an American. And obviously, like, there's both pros and cons of living in this country. If I were to like try, and I think America's like has an important role to play in the world, and sometimes we've abused that, and sometimes we've used it for good. So that's where my brain is going. Of like, how would I fix America? And it would probably be like a few like ranked choice voting. Like, I think that would give us like better candidates and a better selection process, and then we would pick better leaders. And I think everything is kind of downstream from that. yeah, like ranked choice voting or like expanding the House of Representatives because we've capped it and it was never originally meant to be capped would allow for more like better leaders and more democratic way of selecting them.
Straight to civil infrastructure. I like it.
Yeah, sorry.
No,
Oops. That was dirty.
no, that was so good. All right, last question. What is one small change you've made recently that's had a really big impact on your life?
Great question. Maybe I'm not changing enough. I started eating these gummies called Gruins that are like athletic greens, but in gummy form every day. Never been a vitamin person. That's been huge. Maybe I'll end on like I think, I mean, the biggest change I made recently is getting married. And I think that is a really powerful choice. And maybe this is just what older people start thinking. But to me, there is always this tension between optionality and commitment. And this goes for anything. It could be your career. Do I stay with my job or do I go find another job that's even better or find another job that's even better? And we are just inundated with options now. Like technology and the internet have made optionality and just boosted it so much where it is quite easy to never be happy with any part of your life because you think you can go find something better in every single area that you exist in. And that's a deep tension between commitment where part of enjoying, I think, what you have is yes, picking the right thing, but it's also once you've made the pick, maximizing that experience. And I think when you are married, and this is just, a metaphor for like committing to anything, you have, a minimum threshold that has to be met. And once you find that person or you find that job, I think in some cases, and maybe in more cases than people realize, you're best served by going all in and committing to that thing and getting the most out of that thing. Because if you're always being like, what's plan B or what's plan C or what's plan D, you're actually not seeing where plan A would ever really go. And I think there's something quite powerful about, that commitment and being like, this is it. This is what we have to build together. And like, if both of us are locked in and fully committed, like we're going to make this amazing. There's something, a very powerful lesson there.
Thank you. And congratulations again. It is a big choice. And
Thank you.
yeah, I celebrate my 10-year anniversary with my husband in just a couple weeks, and it gets better every year. And it's something
I
that
love it.
very appreciative for. It changes like everything else, right? But changing in a good way, which I'm grateful for.
Yes. Congratulations on 10 years.
Thank you. Well, Kyle, thank you so much for joining me today. This was amazing. Such good conversation. If people want to get in touch with you and learn a little bit more about your podcast or the things that you're doing in your world, what's the best way for them to reach out to you?
Yeah. LinkedIn, Kyle Hagge, Hagge. I'm on there too much and just reach out there.
Perfect. All right. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Thanks, Megan.
Thank you so much for joining me today on Changed. I hope this story sparks something in you. Maybe a reminder of your own growth or a new perspective on where you're headed. Remember, change doesn't have to be something that you're scared of. It's an opportunity to become more of who we're meant to be. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe, share, and leave a review. Your story is unfolding and we can't wait to see where it takes you. Until next time.